Green Bay Packers have had some unique draft plans and strategies over the course of their recent history. Right after the 2025 NFL Draft concluded, I thought it was another year in which the Packers did what the Packers do. I was intrigued and started looking into this year's class to find what the Packers were getting at while trying to understand the way this team drafts and drafted this year in particular. This year's Packers class consisted of all sorts of randomness that was hard to understand initially. Like, why would they go with Matthew Golden, a 5'11" receiver that'll have to slide in and be another guy in that loaded receiver room? Anthony Belton was the second round pick, a monstrous left tackle, but the Packers drafted a left tackle in the first round last year and have had Rasheed Walker as the starting tackle for multiple years now. Then in the third, they draft another receiver, Savion Williams, more of an athlete playmaker type with good size. The Packers later dip into the edge class and take what many thought was the biggest need for this team and take defensive end Barryn Sorrell. In the fifth was Collin Oliver, a specialty edge with some off-ball versatility, and I'd like to mention the 7th round pick, John Williams, the Packers' last pick of this draft, and another left tackle. Now that I gave y'all a really brief rundown, I'll take you deeper into it, explaining and analyzing the aforementioned picks. With each of these players, we'll specifically go over the team or scheme fit with the Packers, the pros and cons of the players, and what the outlook looks like for these guys as rookies. The first guy we'll talk about was the first guy the Packers selected in this draft. It was Matthew Golden, wide receiver from Texas. On first impression, I wasn't thrilled. Letting it marinate and settle while I was digging into the player, I came to think it was a better pick than I thought. First off, I think he is a tremendous fit in this Green Bay Matt LaFleur offense. If you don't know, this team uses clear out routes like crazy. They use their receivers to open their receivers. Matt Golden can stretch the field, carry defenders upfield, and create space for his offense to work. But he can also be the one cutting into the space opened by somebody else with his deeper in cuts and the snap that he has on his routes. Similar to the Packers, the Texas Longhorns used a ton of pre-snap motion to gather intel on the defense or just to gain leverage on the coverage. Therefore, Golden's no stranger to a running start or complex motions, which can be a lot on someone's plate to learn when they're coming into a new offense. I think Matthew Golden's coming in with enough experience doing similar things that he won't really be challenged too bad, and it should be easier to pick up. The Packers praised and thought Matthew Golden had some of the best hands in the draft, and I'm right there with them. Golden does have great hands with a natural ability and coordination to bring the ball in. It kind of reminds me of the way that Dobbs catches the ball in a way. Another thing that I personally loved seeing were the dominant reps versus press man coverage in the SEC. I think that translates, and I like seeing him put DBs in a blender at the collegiate level, knowing it's going to be harder at the next level. If Golden was only barely beating man coverage, I'd still have my concerns because of that skill jump from the college to the NFL. Listening to the quotes from the Packers GM Brian Gutekunst and watching him play, I started to hop on the train and start believing. The GM was asked, "Do you think he can contribute a lot?" And he said, "I do," all glowingly, and even later added, "He's going to be versatile enough to do whatever we ask him." They think he can play anywhere and contribute right away. Brian Gutekunst also mentioned the rejection of trades to stick and pick Matt Golden. He said, "We could have gone a number of ways. We just kind of felt this was the best thing for our football team." Now, he said that despite having emphasis on how much they liked their receivers they had in that room before the draft. Both the GM and then head coach Matt LaFleur brought up his talent, saying you can't coach 4-2-9 and that he can help against man blitz scenarios, which was oddly specific and something that they probably had their focus on. In the second round of the 2025 NFL Draft, the Packers selected Anthony Belton with the 54th overall pick. This one's probably my least favorite pick, or close to it, from this entire class. The fit with this team needs to come over time, because right now I'm not thinking this was a really great or obvious fit in terms of player to team, but he can develop in this scheme and just as an overall player to eventually become a player to fit within this offense. Hopefully that makes sense. I mentioned I wasn't the biggest fan of Anthony Belton, and I think it's mostly about how high they valued the player. Belton was picked number 54th overall, and when you think of a near top 50 player, I'd envision a better product and more of a starting caliber player, but Belton was more of the develop and gamble on the traits type, to me at least. Now feels like a good time to dive into it and explore Belton's tape to dissect why I view him as a bit of a reach. The biggest, most glaring flaw in Belton's game was his upper body mechanics and his tendency to play with his his size more than good technique. He's very much a leaner and uses his weight more than he should. I'd like to see him take a more technical approach rather than just playing the I'm bigger and stronger than you game. Obviously, Belton's size is a draw-in trait, but even at 6'6", 336, you still have to play with some technique. I don't know how many times I watched him try to inflict his overwhelming size on a defender, and it just doesn't work because he's too far forward. Anthony's feet kind of stall during contact, and he really struggles to match or connect everything together. If he's lunging his upper body looking for a grappling match, he's too focused up top, then fails to keep his feet in a favorable spot relative to the rest of his body. Almost in a vice versa way, Belton can be too kick slide happy and overset with his base as he carries too far upfield, leaving him vulnerable to inside counter moves. So you think he may be a bit too focused down low, setting beyond a certain point and forgets positioning. Anthony's run blocks are some of the most sheddable blocks I've ever seen. His biggest downfall is the hand placement and the lack of control he has over his weight and where he's leaning or carrying towards. It's so underwhelming for someone that profiles like a mauler when he's just falling off blocks because he's grappling and imposing his weight uncontrollably. That's enough of the bad mouthing. I think we can start focusing more on the good parts of Belton's game. So we got the bad stuff out of the way, but at the same time, the bad really helps the good shine. There were plenty of times where Belton was in a compromising position or playing with bad leverage, but his sheer size, and if I had to guess, his core strength allowed him to sustain blocks despite the sometimes bad circumstances. I was at least happy to see Belton fire backward off the snap and show that he can move his lower body with some good speed. He doesn't always play super fast, but there was certainly enough times that I saw him get out and the feet looked NFL-ish. The Belton flashes I see when his hands are in a half decent spot are really good, and you start thinking about what he could be if he just becomes more technically sound. Belton also comes with some intangibles like awareness, discipline, and a good motor. I'd expect Anthony to be more of a spot starter in year one and ride the bench, learn the game, and improve on the more technical aspects of the game. In college, you can get away with a lot, especially in the ACC, but the NFL is a different game. Belton's college tape looked too unstable, and I think a year of dialing in the nuances and having your focus solely on bettering yourself and learning his position can only benefit Anthony Belton and his career. Onto the third round pick, Savion Williams, the do-it-all freak human receiver out of TCU. Man, I love this player. I am curious as to why they went this direction, adding Savion after already drafting a receiver earlier and you already had a solid room. But the player couldn't be any more fun to watch. Savion Williams is electric and definitely something that unleashes Matt LaFleur's genius offensive mind to get creative with. Both Matt and the GM, Brian Gutekunst, brought up his fit in this offense, the creativity they could use. They loved what he could do with the ball in his hands and just how special he is as an athlete. Matt LaFleur uses escort motions, orbit motions, and I guess just motions his receivers a lot to get creative looks. And with Savion, I imagine it's not going to be any different. LaFleur said Savion's just a big explosive guy, just being able to find different ways to get him the ball was important. You can tell the scouting staff, the coaches, and the GM himself just love the player and how he could potentially be utilized under this regime. Goody even said, "Didn't think I'd be up here talking about two receivers, but when he was up there, he was just another one of our staff favorites across the board." Savion is a standout specimen and a great example of a height, weight, speed freak. I was literally blown away on first impressions. The movement skills and fluidity for a guy his size is pretty unbelievable. There's actually blocks when it's funny because he's just so overwhelming as a blocker. Williams has great length, great strength, and he can push guys around and jolt into them. But the best thing is that he blocks through the echo of the whistle. At Savion's enormous size, you better be able to box out and play with good physicality, and he does. He's quick to get in a good position relative to the defensive back, remains in a good spot, and can really put his size and physicality to work. Another thing that comes with size is the difficulty to put him on the ground. Savion broke tackles at a high level, and you better bring some help to tackle him too. He'll literally push piles with multiple tacklers. Savion's got that unpolished narrative surrounding him, but the more I saw, the more I like some of the nuance and intricacies of his game. He's an incredibly smart blocker, he feels space really well, and even comes back to the ball to create more space. Savion Williams is a bona fide playmaker with tremendous gifts and the ability to turn a little play into an explosive for his offense. He really has it all, talking about his quickness and elusiveness, the break tackle ability, the acceleration, oh, and not to mention the long speed. It's incredible. You hear me rave, but there's obviously reasons why he's not a first-round pick. I can talk about his inhumane ability all I want, but there's certainly some drawbacks. First thing that most people bring up is his inability to catch the football. Drops were a very annoying part of his game. Savion had a drop rate exceeding 10% on his entire career and around 12% over this past season. But on the bright side, you can see it's a lot of a lack or loss of concentration on most of them, so you know part of the issue. The polished versus unpolished argument comes in when you talk more about Savion as a pure wide receiver. You can watch him break all the tackles in the world, run past dudes, and make these absurd plays, but on the other side of him was Jack Besh, another receiver at TCU, who was an actual receiver. So you get to compare those two, and yeah, safe to say Savion might not be as dangerous or effective if he were to just play a more prototypical role. You can watch Savion and get so caught up in his athletic ability that you kind of forget about the whole receiver part of his evaluation. Watching Savion as a standalone, one-off kind of thing is so much different than watching, comparing, and assessing his receiver ability alongside a lot of other receivers. Prototypical receiver criteria is not where this kid excels the most. He is his own thing, and it's not quite something you see every day. Head coach Matt LaFleur was impressed on his 30 visit, praising his intelligence and said he'll be able to handle the load that comes with being more of a movable chess piece rather than your prototypical outside receiver. I also listened to someone ask LaFleur, with how raw Savion is, do you think there's ways to still find ways for him to help you in 2025? Matt LaFleur replied quickly and said, absolutely. LaFleur said he'll work his imagination and creativity in the lab to come up with some things for Savion. Moving to the Packers' 4th round pick, Barryn Sorrell, the defensive end from Texas. Packers head coach Matt LaFleur said, with Sorrell, we added a big-time culture guy. He played at a high level in some big-time games. And they kept hitting that home. There was a clear emphasis on the human that they drafted into their locker room. Both the GM and the head coach wouldn't shut up about this guy and had nothing but awesome things to say about Sorrell. Gutekunst even said, he's exceptionally durable. He's been productive for multiple years at Texas. He's very strong. He's very smart, very technique sound. He's got really strong hands to knock blockers off balance, and then his ability to finish. Listen, I'm fully on board for this pick. Barryn might be a phenomenal guy, but he's also a really solid player out on the field. He should slide into Jeff Hafley's scheme as a defensive end, and I think he'll be ready to contribute day one. For a 4th round pick, I think Barryn is well worth it, and especially when I considered the Anthony Belton pick as a gamble earlier. Sorrell's overall hand usage is an integral part of his identity as a player, and the polish he displays is very impressive. He's also got some pop back to him. He can get off the ball, and when those hands land, the tackle will fly back. Barryn will also use all 32.5 inches of his arm length to his advantage. This almost ties into the hand usage, but he also plays so long and always extended to dictate the point of attack. He's very natural and coordinated when matching his hands and his arms. Sorrell does have an arsenal of moves, but I thought the push slide and push pull moves were his bread and butter. Especially against the run, he had tremendous savvy to disengage from blocks and make a play at the point. I did go in and expect to see Barryn Sorrell destroy blocks and play heavier than he's listed, but I must say I'm slightly disappointed that he's not a wrecking ball power rusher type of player. I was led to believe he was a pure power player, and sure, he can play with some power, but I wouldn't say he's an incredibly dominant or primarily wins by getting through offensive linemen's chests. I also thought Barryn could get too far upfield from time to time, but that was a very small thing and can be induced from scheme and what he's coached to do. This is an incredibly smart and experienced player that isn't much of a project pick, and I'm actually surprised that he was actually there in the 4th round to take. I really think he can impact the Packers defense in year 1 and continue to develop with time. I'd mostly say he fits in because he's so aware, he runs stunts well, and I think his controlled play style can give you consistency off the edge. This is a great pick and someone that could be rostered for the next 9 years in the league. In the 5th, the Packers selected Collin Oliver, an edge or outside backer from Oklahoma State, and I thought he was at least worth mentioning. There's been a lot made about Oliver becoming a DPR, which means designated pass rusher, but I wasn't coming away thinking that at all after watching him. Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley shut down the DPR role talks and went on to mention his ability as a versatile player that can play off the ball and do different stuff. To me, I think I see him more as a backup for a guy like Edgerrin Cooper, who takes snaps on and off ball, gets downhill, and attacks with physicality. Obviously, I'd be tasking Oliver with less coverage assignments if he ever had to step in for a guy like Edgerrin Cooper, playing a more expanded role, and I'd try to keep Oliver playing in a more natural and comfortable spot. Collin's got the quickness and some good movement skills. He'll always utilize that athleticism and consistently pressure the outside shoulder of an offensive tackle. Oliver also showed an ability to read and very quickly react to what was in front of him, which I actually thought would play better as an off-ball player. Collin Oliver may have speed off the edge. However, there's no power element in his game at all. He's extremely raw or green in terms of pass rush moves and polish. You mostly saw the same moves, and that's actually when he'd attempt pass rush moves. Sometimes he'd just try to out-athlete the guy. I also thought he couldn't harness and use his speed to generate any power. You'd see him get into a guy's pads, but there's zero push from his end. Gutekunst was asked about Collin Oliver's smaller stature, and he said that they needed someone that can chase down the quarterback, and also mentioned the way he can shift back to Sam linebacker and play the run well as a strong side linebacker instead of playing the run poorly as an edge rusher. Now, I personally wasn't too wowed or excited about this pick or the player. I'm sure he's a great guy, and I can't wait to see the role he has and how he develops under this coaching staff, who I believe has a plan and can develop him a little bit. John Williams is the last player I'll go over, and he was the offensive tackle from Cincinnati. John was a 7th round pick, but people had higher grades on him than that, and you'll see why in just a second. The first thing you need to know is that John Williams was an aerospace engineering major in college and smarter than I will ever be. Not saying that's a hard bar to surpass. The Packers are in love with college left tackles that have flexibility and profile like versatile offensive linemen that can shuffle any which way they teach him to go. But as far as where John will find his home, I think he can stick outside as a tackle despite the talks of him moving inside. The Packers even see him as a tackle and guard. They weren't strictly saying he has to move inside. I am high on this player, and I'll give him some praise here for the next moments of the video. I like his foot speed. He's very capable of sticking with a fast rusher and mirroring the speed off the line, setting at the right depth, and all while he's aware of the pocket and where his quarterback should or would be. The hand usage and polish was amazing from Williams. He'll flash and bait the defender. He'll also bat your hands down to get inside. I also saw him reset his hands mid-rep to recover. Williams plays with good length and has 34 3/4 inch arms to do so. John is also hard to counter inside on, as he'll always have that inside hand ready. He's got this strong inside hand that gives him presence and walls off defenders, kind of sticking his hand out to stop him until the rest of him can get inside with that hand. I can only watch so much John Williams, but not once did I see John take the bait and bite. He seems to be a very balanced player, and he's really got to trust himself. Now, I do think Williams could stand and probably needs to be more of a mean player. There's multiple times he just blocks for a certain duration, kind of just doing the curriculum without doing any of the extracurricular activities to finish plays. You rarely see the combo blocks or just overall work from Williams up on that second level of the field. John's also not the most consistent player out in space either. He's not one I'm betting on to land a majority of his block attempts in space and or on the move. This is a solid player with the smarts to excel in the NFL and eventually start if given the opportunity. I really like that his experience and intelligence shines through in his play, and I'll be surprised if he's not on the roster to start the season despite that 7th round draft capital. I think the Packers and I see him similarly, considering coach Matt LaFleur said we had Williams there in the 7th. We had a much higher grade on Williams. Ryan Gutekunst went out of his way to rave about John Williams when he was asked simply what traits he liked from him. He responded saying, got great length, exceptionally bright, really smart. He's got the versatility to play left tackle and guard. You know, he probably could play center because he's smart enough too. He's one of the few guys that can really play with full extension with his hands and moving his feet at the same time. And again, we were down there in the 7th round, and it was like we were just really It's unusual for a guy that can play left tackle and guard, play 4 spots, for you to be down there at that spot. That's what Brian Gutekunst had to say. This class as a whole was very interesting in many ways. We just covered the 2 very different receivers, the 2 additions to the front 7 on the defense, and 2 more additions along the offensive line. The other 2 picks included depth for the defensive lineman spot and a cornerback that has some traits. The strategy is odd yet effective, and I see it as a best available approach at all times. How else do you end up drafting like this? Anyways, that'll do it for me. Thank you for watching. If you guys enjoyed, go ahead and leave a like, go down, subscribe, go to the past content on the channel. It would mean a lot, and I'll see you guys next time. Deuces!